the zoom out level is confused purpose. Are we doing this to bring in cultural activists, athletes, or are we doing this for the economy?
As far as the self-employed program goes, it's, I think, having a very limited and narrow effect in terms of moving forward Canada's economic advantages or potential advantages. That being said, I'll confess I'm somewhat at a loss as to what to replace it with in terms of the self-employed.
Well, I think part of the confusion about the program is what is its purpose? The motivation between the individual is not necessarily the same as between the motivation for IRCC and why they have this sector. Does an individual writer or musician necessarily generate a lot of economic benefit by the income that they earn themselves, or is there economic stimulus based upon their industry participation?
I think one of the issues, and this is inherent with a lot of the immigration program generally, it's difficult to predict. Whenever there's subjectivity or discretion in the immigration system, sometimes inconsistent findings in terms of, let's say, the cultural, what counts as cultural and so forth.
IRCC did an investigation into this program itself because it was becoming so expensive to administer. Unequivocally, every visa post that participated in that survey responded with, the main problem is people don't know what it is that you want them to provide in terms of documentation and who it is that you're looking for. What is very insidious about this government is that it's getting rid of inventory by these manufactured refusals, these decisions to, and again, I'll go back to the case. The court found as a matter of fact that it was a management level decision to decide no longer to send document requests that would tell them what you wanted them to submit, like do you want a business plan or not?
I agree entirely with what Pantea said, and as I think you and Catherine had said, it's more systemic across, that it's not right to say we're going to judge it harder now because we need fewer of them.
We cannot forget about the bigger system problem. This system of ambiguity, this system of no transparency, no accountability, and this system of increasingly showing blatant the distrust that it has for the people that own the system. Okay, hello and welcome to another Catalyst Canada Roundtable. Before we dive in, I'm going to briefly introduce our today's guests, all highly accomplished lawyers with extensive experience in immigration law. In alphabetical order, we have Randy Hahn, partner at Garson Immigration Law and a certified specialist in immigration law with more than 30 years of experience. We then have Pantea Jafari, founder and lead counsel at Jafari Law, a litigator best known for representing 110 Iranian applicants in overturning their PR refusals under the federal self-employed program, which is our today's topic of conversation. And we have Catherine Sass, co-founder of Sass & Ing Immigration Law in Vancouver, a seasoned immigration lawyer with 35 plus years of experience. Beyond their legal practice, all of our guests, like the other featured lawyers on Catalyst Canada, they have been actively involved in shaping Canadian immigration policy. For example, among other titles, Catherine has served as the past chair of the Immigration and Citizenship section of the Canadian Bar Association. Randy has served as the past chair of the Immigration section of the Ontario Bar Association, and Pantea has been highly involved on the executive of the CBA and working with the Anti-Racism Committee. Of course, this is just a glimpse into our guests' accomplishments, so I encourage the audience to check our website or our guests' website to know and learn more about each of them. Okay, with that introduction, I'm just going to set the premise and then we start our conversation. So our premise is actually very simple. Canada is in deep economic problems, and one of the best pipeline for money is, of course, economic immigration. And 60% of the immigrants that we take in Canada are selected under economic programs, which essentially sees people as economic units. We're not talking about the merits of whether that this is moral or not. We're just accepting the reality that this is how things are. And Catalyst Canada proposition is simple. If we're not abolishing economic immigration in Canada, at least let's get it right. Under economic immigration, we have business immigration, which has the biggest multiplier effect if the economy is the objective. Under business immigration, we have different streams, one of which is the federal self-employed program, which is, in my opinion, a confused program. On the one end, it has a narrow focus on athletes and people with cultural experience, and on the other hand, it's asking people to be economically established in Canada. So there's kind of a confusion in the intent and the policy objective of the program, which we of course will discuss. So let's start with this question and go in alphabetical order. I'm going to start with Randy. Randy, do you think the federal self-employed program as it currently stands, it's helping Canada with its economic objectives? You're on mute.
I took to heart your earlier suggestion of making sure we were on mute when we weren't speaking, so I'll try to remember to turn it on and off accordingly. The short answer is, look, there's lots of problems with, as you pointed out, with Canada's economy and related economic issues, and how the immigration programs do and don't tie into that. As far as the self-employed program goes, it's, I think, having a very limited and narrow effect in terms of moving forward Canada's economic advantages or potential advantages. That being said, I'll confess I'm somewhat at a loss as to what to replace it with in terms of the self-employed. I can see all the problems. I'm a little unclear as to what alternatives might be preferable.
Can you tell us a little bit about the problems that you see with the federal self-employed program? We're going to call it FSE for short. So what are the problems that at least the top three in your mind?
Well, I think the problems include, as you suggest, I won't necessarily characterize it as a problem, but it's an issue that, has to be understood and dealt with, is how narrow it is in scope. And you point out that, I think a possible incongruity between, the focus on the culture and the athletic background, and then the economic contribution to Canada. I think there can be an economic contribution, but it's not for a lot of self-employed. Obviously, it's not the same as sort of growing a business that's going to result in a lot of job creation. Although it could conceivably. I think one of the issues, and this is inherent with a lot of the immigration program generally, is that it's difficult to predict. Okay, and I think whenever there's subjectivity or discretion in the immigration system, the positive part of that is that we'd like to think that at the end of the day, there's a human, ideally an empathetic human, who's looking at a particular set of circumstances and using discretion as need be in an appropriate way. And even though there may be guidelines set out and so forth, but you get sometimes inconsistent findings in terms of, let's say, the cultural, what counts as cultural and so forth. I was taking a quick look in anticipation of this conversation, a couple of the recent cases, well, not as recent, but a couple of the cases in terms of wrestling with the issue of what's cultural or not. So the courts in one instance says this from a case from a number of years ago, but Chinese traditional medicine, including Chinese therapeutic massage clinic, that's not going to pass muster in terms of cultural. On the other side of the coin, though, suggesting that there might be something to be said, or at least it was wrong to sort of turn it down on the face of it, that someone who was an explorer, a leader of northern expeditions, and a husky trainer, maybe that could be part of culture. So you can see how you throw all this into the mix. It can be very difficult. But I do think there does need to be an avenue for those of cultural and athletic accomplishments, to have an avenue for them to come to Canada. And the added thing I'll mention in terms of the unpredictability, as you may know, this program did include farmers.
Yeah.
At some point, that was from what I could tell, it was a 2018 through ministerial instruction that was paused, and it was characterized as a temporary pause. That's some 7 years ago. So that I think feeds into a larger issue to do with immigration, but the sometimes lack of transparency or consultation, or in terms of these ministerial instructions coming, going, or sometimes not even instructions, just policy. This is what we're doing and not doing.
So you're taking issue with the program at design level and also an implementation. On the design level, that confused purpose. So Pantea, I'm going to come to you. And so there is the zoom out level is confused purpose. Are we doing this to bring in cultural activists, athletes, or are we doing this for the economy? And then also the implementation have some problem, right? Is it predictable? Does it make sense? Who really fits here? What are your thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts, so I'll try to restrain them because I've been litigating this program for the past 7 years, and I'm presently litigating it still again. You started with the Tafreshi judgment. We've got 3 group litigations going subsequent to that, derivative of that, that are before the court presently and experiencing an incredible amount of issues, which we can get into. But to answer your specific questions in terms of, is it meeting its economic benefits? I definitely don't think it is, because of so many problems. There's a design problem in its outset, which is that the eligibility requirements for the program aren't set out at the outset. So in the regulatory framework of the program, only one of the eligibility criteria of work experience is defined. The other 2 are not. And those other 2 aren't even set out in the document materials, in the guides, in the checklist. And so it creates this big weight of procedural fairness that has been traditionally supplied in the processing phase instead, because people don't know what to do with them up front. So IRCC did an investigation into this program itself because it was becoming so expensive to administer because of those procedural guarantees that are required to be provided during the processing phase. And unequivocally, every visa post that participated in that survey responded with, the main problem is people don't know what it is that you want them to provide in terms of documentation and who it is that you're looking for. So for example, that survey produced the fact that it was a lot of small-time farmers from India and China that were applying, when the intention of the program was more commercial farming. So that led to the farm program being paused. But with the rest of the programs, the other 2 streams with the athletes and the cultural, they seemingly were more well-defined, both in terms of course, the structure of the NOC codes that feed into it. So Randy was talking about expanding whether some particular things could be regarded as cultural or not. I'll preface that by saying it goes by NOC categories. There is a NOC designation of what goes into cultural. So it's just a matter of whether you can try to fit yourself into a specific NOC. But I think there are guidelines for that. But then, so because of the lack of guidelines up front, there is tremendous potential for abuse in the implementation. And that's where we're at with all these subsequent litigations, where we do think, especially against at least some populations and through some visa posts, there is an abusive process occurring. That abuse is rising to an abuse of power, is what's being argued. That's causing not only the potential and intended benefit of the program to be lost, but also it's a significant economic drain on Canadian taxpayers to be paying for all of this litigation in the program. The extensive litigation and weight of processing is what led the program to really become of interest and investigation to the minister. And the litigation has exploded since, I would argue, based on our own experience and what we've been doing. And in the subsequent litigations, for example, the minister has put up 3 senior lawyers against me whose salary they're paying, all the staff, all the clerks. And I've asked for ATIP evidence to see what they are paying for the litigation funds in this program, which hasn't been provided to me. But I think any potential, which it does have a significant potential, because these people that come in then create lots of additional revenue for Canadians in terms of both collaboration with international artists and athletes, as well as jobs to Canadians. So when, a singer-songwriter comes in to put on a concert, they're bringing revenue to the venues, to the sound techs and crews and local staff in that way. So there's tremendous potential for an economic benefit from these individuals, but that potential is being lost in the processing and litigation weight of its administration.
Based on your experience with this litigation, is it fair to summarize your point that the root cause of this litigation is confusion at policymaker level? Like they don't know what they're doing with this program, because you provided, I think, something very interesting at the end of your point. You're saying, hey, if we're bringing in artists, we're expecting them to generate revenue, and therefore we're expecting them to create Canadian jobs, but none of these things are anywhere in the design of the federal self-employed program. So on the one hand, the federal self-employed program, it's like an easy, empowering program, kind of like communicating this message, hey, just bring your own job and show me that you're willing and able to keep that job. I'm not going to put anything extra on you. Just show me that you have that relative experience. Just bring your own job. But on the other hand, it seems like that the policymaker is looking for revenue, job creation, and almost everything that we are looking at in other programs. For example, the entrepreneurial program that we had before the start of visa that we have now. Catherine, what are your thoughts on the confusion of the program, on the bigger picture, and then how that confusion, brings all the problems that Pantea is very actively engaged with?
Can you hear me now? Good. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think part of the confusion about the program is what is its purpose? And the motivation between the individual is not necessarily the same as between the motivation for IRCC and why they have this sector. And so you were talking about the revenue generation. I don't think most of the individuals that are applying, or at least that I've worked with over the 30 some years or that I've been doing this, or more, they don't sit there and ask themselves, what can I do for Canada? They're asking themselves, how I want to come to Canada, I want to stay in Canada, and I can access this program. So that may be one of the fundamental disconnects. I have brought many athletes and many artists in cultural activities over the years, and I really think I've only had maybe 2 refusals. It's been a pretty straightforward program. And for many, many years, there wasn't a lot of litigation. I'm fascinated to hear about Pantea's experience with litigating the program. So are we seeking to have economic benefit that is provided by each and every individual applicant? Or are we seeking to have economic benefit that results from these people coming to Canada and participating in their industry? I don't know that a hockey player or a football player or a jockey is necessarily, because I brought in all those different athletes, is necessarily individually stimulating the economy and making significant benefit. But as Pantea alluded to, filling the stadiums and all the people that are employed and all the tickets that are sold and all the ancillary employment that spins off from these individuals, that's a big deal. The same thing goes from people within the cultural activities. I bring a lot of people within the film and television industry. Does an individual writer or musician necessarily generate a lot of economic benefit by the income that they earn themselves? or is there economic stimulus based upon their industry participation? And that's why we have Hollywood North or Hollywood East or whatever, and why all the smaller provinces are trying to get this film production up here, because it keeps their economies going. So there seems to be what I would say a disconnect between what is the purpose of the program. The other thing I'd like to say is typically this program has been a very, very small program, a very, very small program. And I started with it in 1993. I can't remember specifically, around 2012, 2013, I spoke with the officer that was processing one of my cases, and I had a really high success rate in those cases. It doesn't matter what her name was. She said, in the last year, we processed 89 self-employed applications. 89. So that's 2012 or 2010. We know that we were looking at 250,000 immigrants a year and 89 self-employed cases. Okay, even if you multiply that by 4, we're talking about 400 people. It's a really small part of the program. I think the program expanded exponentially after, I would say, 2 things. One was the closure of the entrepreneur program and the investor program, and investors or financial people, business people had no place else to turn. And then I would say another factor in its explosion was the election of President Trump. And people, particularly in both the cultural and artistic sectors, wanted to have an option to reside somewhere else, which goes back to what's the goal? Is it an individual motivated goal, or is it an industry motivated goal, or is it an economic benefit to Canada? And we're going to try and be mind readers and have a crystal ball and say, what are these people going to do for our country? So overall, I think the program, how it was designed back in 2002 when IRPA was introduced, or even earlier, was a good one for what it was bringing to the country. Over time, it has morphed, and IRCC has not adapted to those changing realities.
There is one very, very interesting point that you're raising, and it's a recurring theme in at least the conversations that we have so far had in Catalyst Canada, and maybe the overall Canadian immigration system, that people try to fit where they do not belong. And that absolutely is a design flaw. So you're saying, hey, we closed the investor program, we closed the entrepreneur program. Now all of a sudden people are trying to say, hey, I'm an athlete, I'm a cultural activist, I'm a knock 5 category, so I can fit myself into this program. So then again, everything kind of goes back to, let's be honest and let's figure out what it is that we want to have with this program. So let's zoom out. And Randy, do you think that a cultural pursuit is the same as an economic pursuit? Can we mix the two? Let's like figure this out. Do we want people to come, bring their literature, bring their art, bring their poetry, their movies, their film, or whatever, to contribute to the Canadian culture? Or do we want them to come here and make money? Should it be either of these things? Should it be both of them? How can we reconcile this cultural and economic purposes?
Well, I guess the short answer is what I used to opt for when I was doing the multiple choice tests for law school or something. All of the above. I think you can do both the culture, and it can have the economic spin-offs that both Pantea and Catherine have mentioned. Catherine had mentioned, which I concur with it, that very much, that it's a guessing game a lot of the time with immigration as to, okay, we want to select these people, even even if it's the not quite half percentage of the immigrants who come to Canada under an economic class, with the expectation that they'll flourish economically. And we can throw a lot of things into the mix as to what their background is, what Canada's supposed needs are at a particular point in time, and so forth. But there's a lot of uncertainty, and frankly, there's a part of me that's thinking, the sort of days. It's okay. We'll do the best we can, but who knows what's going to happen once people get here. I remember years ago when they used to the system would be such that there'd be you'd look up the job, not a knock code or something, or not quite the same as the current knock codes or something, and then there would be a demand level for that, and it was much more complicated than the just a relatively brief demand list that there might be now for some jurisdictions. And so you'd look down, and I remember reading it, looking, and it had poet, and then there was a number assigned to that. This is how much we need poets in Canada. And then there was immigration policy analyst. They scored higher, interestingly enough. I would have thought it would be in the self-interest of people making those lists to have fewer people to compete. But anyhow, that by way of just sort of illustrating the difficulty of trying to put an objective um, platform, if you will, on things that are very subjective in some ways, and that's the maddening part. You get into inconsistencies, you get into uncertainties, and but I don't know the way out of it. Like, I mean, particularly when you're talking about culture. I mean, we can talk about world-class level and so on and so forth. That can be, imprecise, but then, how do you measure it? Is it just economic terms? Of course, there's lots of great culture and artists that, don't make a huge amount of money, but they can very much contribute to, their community and the country they're a part of. It's good if you don't mind me asking. I wanted to ask Pantea, because I know that the litigation she's referring to, that she's been very involved on and involved with, and talking about the I think abusiveness, I think was the word you use in some visa posts and so forth. So I just wanted to sort of tease out from you, for my own edification, what your perspective is on that. Is it that you think some officers or some designated officers are deliberately making things more difficult for people from some places, as opposed to just the inherent ineptitude that we've come to expect?
Well, interestingly, the applicants overall are made to presume that it's an officer-based decision. So when you get a refusal, the presumption is there's some rogue officer that's doing something, and so you proceed with individual litigations. But what the group litigation proved through access to information request, and the judge found as a matter of fact, was that it wasn't an officer-based situation. At the management level, there was quote unquote deliberate and calculated decision. Calculated being very important, because they were aware of the high litigation rate in this program. They basically did an analysis. Okay, the number of people we think will litigate versus the number of people who will accept as given for whatever reason that they failed. And they made that decision to deprive them of their rights to procedural fairness in change of practice without notice, and also in the standards to be met suddenly being elevated to something that the applicants didn't have an awareness of, and refusing it based on that. Once it turned to the officer level, yes, there seemed to be rogue officers. The ATIP shows that one officer in particular refused close to like 200 applications in the first day that he got the transfer of inventory from Ankara to Warsaw. But when you look at it at a macro level, that was precipitated by a management level decision to not abide by procedural fairness, to not send out document requests. And they're just, they talk about fettering discretion when we get settlements, and they say, oh, well, we can't agree to this, we can't agree to that because it's fettering discretion. But at that kind of a level, they're fettering discretion that all officers categorically were not to conduct interviews and were not to send out document requests.
Let's say Catherine's been reflecting on the many she's done throughout the years, many I presume, or she may have said, from the United States, right? And obviously, do you think there's a correlation between the management directives you're talking about in terms of some parts of the world and not others?
Absolutely. And again, that's what the evidence proved, because Catherine's talking about a traditionally very low inventory in this program, and that was the case. But suddenly the inventory at one visa post in particular exploded through a high volume of Iranian applicants that were now by the hundreds going to this program on an annual basis. And when that visa post exploded in applications in this category, they didn't have the capacity purportedly to deal with the inventory. They transferred it to Warsaw for them to deal with the inventory, to get rid of the inventory. And that became suddenly this decision to, basically wipe out the inventory on standard refusals, generic refusals that were repetitive. But how we prove the calculated decision, the deliberateness of that decision, is we compared what was happening in Ankara with what was happening in other visa posts, even by Iranians. So, for example, if an Iranian, because of their wife working in the UK, had a UK residence that allowed them to go to the visa post for that, they were swiftly approved on the exact same manner, in the same evidentiary record that representative was preparing these applications by. The other visa posts were readily approving it, and whoever got the misfortune of being in this Ankara versus Warsaw was being categorically refused.
And why would the management at one visa post or more than one visa post be taking a different perspective than the other? If
but
the
Randy,
Iranians
I think we already put that in context. It's just confusion. Like, they don't know what they're doing. This is the simple truth of the matter. They don't know what we're doing. And then inventory, because that again, I want to juxtapose that on you do agree or you do not
agree with that.
So the decision, because let's put it on the very, very grand scale of things, right? The immigration game in Canada is a numbers game. Like, there is close to zero talk about how we do immigration substantively at the political level. It's all about numbers. Blue, red, doesn't matter the color. It's all a numbers game. Reducing people to number makes sense why inventory would scare you off, right? IRCC calls everything lines of business. So if you are saying that inventory, if you're saying that the jump of the inventory is not, because, we are on the current right now on the conversation that we're in. We're talking about the current state of the federal self-employed program, and we're talking about the troubles we are having with its execution and implementation. One of those problems is this mess. So if inventory is not it, I think there is some value about root causing why it's happening now. But if inventory is not it, confusion is, or there is something else, Pantea, in your opinion.
So you're speaking about officer confusion as to what standard to apply.
Program confusion. If I don't ask you to give me a business plan that shows me that you have the potential of making millions of dollars in Canada under a federal self-employed program, which I'm asking, I want you because your contribution to our cultural and athletic life, that's confusion. Right? I cannot have a design that is meant to target people who, I'm going back to the question that I asked Randy, right? Culture, economy, they can't really mesh in a good way as far as an immigration system is concerned, right? So I can't, on the one hand, signal you, I want just your presence. You as this poet walking down Canadian streets is enough for me as Canada because you're contributing to my culture. That's kind of the program design, right? Score 35 points in this grid, just self-employed. But at the same time, I ask you, where is your business plan?
Exactly.
Where's your market research? Where's your this? Where's your that? So I root cause that as confusion. Confusion that we gathered here today to solve, right? With the proposals that we have.
So my point and my position is I absolutely agree with the confusion up front. That's actually why one of the main legal issues is it a breach of fundamental justice, security of the person, for you to not set out clearly what your eligibility criteria is and what your documentary standard for proving that is. So do you absolutely want a very detailed business plan? Tell me up front so that I know and can make an informed decision as to whether to apply or not. Where I don't think it's based on confusion is at the officer level refusing it. That to me is proven to be a deliberate and calculated decision, management level, not individual. So when we talk about everything being reduced to numbers, in my opinion, that's exactly why we see some visa posts suddenly go high and swift on refusals, because they're trying to get rid of that unwanted inventory, but they're doing it in a dishonest way. When we had Prime Minister Harper, whatever you said about him, at least he did it publicly. He closed the applications so that you knew that's how he was getting rid of the inventory. But what is very insidious about this government is that it's getting rid of inventory by these manufactured refusals, these these decisions to, and again, I'll go back to the case. The court found as a matter of fact that it was a management level decision to decide no longer to send document requests that would tell them what you wanted them to submit, like, do you want a business plan or not? And that management level decision not to conduct interviews where the person was clearly confused as to what to submit. So that to me is not a confusion at an officer level. That's them following instructions to get rid of the inventory.
Sure. Catherine, what are your thoughts on this? Because based on what Pantea is saying, well, the officer was just following orders from management and management was clearly confused. What are we doing with this program?
I have so many comments to make about all of it. The first one I'm going to say is when IRCC is facing, and this has been historic for as long as I've been an immigration lawyer, and Siavash, we've talked about this on other panels to do with business immigration, but it's systemic. When IRCC is facing an overload, they refuse cases. They refuse cases. And you've done the research, Pantea, that I've never heard about because management has done a calculated risk of what it's going to cost them and how many people are actually going to take the initiative to fight these cases in court. I want to go back to Randy's comment about, do we want cultural or athletic activities as an economic pursuit? Well, in doing these cases for so long, I can tell you, you made a reference to that, the starving artist. Do we want to have a starving artist? Do you know what the threshold has been for as long as I've been doing this? The LICO figures. The LICO figures, the fact that this is business immigration, that we want to stimulate the economy, but the litmus test that officers are using are, do you meet the LICO figures as a result of your self-employed activities, doing whatever? And I've brought in a lot of people that I would say are just on the cusp of going, aspiring stars, not actual stars. It's not just the big fish that come here. In fact, I would tell you it's not the big fish that come here. It's the smaller fish that want to be able to swim in a smaller pool and be able to make a name for themselves. So again, there's this disconnect between what is the motivation. I could tell you, I've never done a business plan for any of my self-employed cases. Never. And that was never a requirement. The requirement as set out in the legislation that was introduced on June 28th of 2002 is pretty clear. If you've been doing this for 5 years and you've been able to support yourself and your family as a result of your self-employed activities, you're going to get in. And that was always the case. The process has morphed over time and through litigation. For example, there never was a knock list of occupations that were considered cultural occupations or athletic occupations. That didn't come into creation until, 2013, 14, 15. And another colleague of mine in Vancouver shared it with me. I'm going, oh, how interesting. They've actually put their minds to this. That had never been an issue for not in my experience. I can also tell you that the shift that has come about through litigation. And where you see that now they're asking for these things because the federal court comes out and says, well, you didn't provide this, you didn't provide this. So all of a sudden, that's what IRCC is looking for. In 2000, 9, 10, 11, I put through people as graphic designers on the list, as a production accountant, not on the list, both approved. I now do that in 2017 or 2018. That graphic designer that's on the list is refused because they characterize him as a marketing consultant. That was a London decision. Production accountant, who only is an accountant for film and television productions, is refused because he's just an accountant and he's applying under the wrong code. So to get back to getting rid of inventory, that's what we need to expect. We're seeing that in all aspects of immigration program delivery right now, not just in the business plan or business program. And as Randy said at the outset, I don't have the answer to this. This was a really nice program that, in theory, met their objectives as they were defined when the Act was introduced in 2002. That's no longer the case when you shut down other business programs, and aspiring business people have no other option but to try and pigeonhole themselves into the programs that remain. So there needs to be a fundamental rethink of our business immigration program.
I would say if I could jump in quickly that perhaps just to concur very strongly, which I think the rest of you have all touched on, is notwithstanding my I guess my recognition that there's discretion, there's uncertainty, and sometimes that comes with the territory, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when it comes to, that shouldn't be tied to processing goals or limits or so-called inventory backlog, meaning that with the selection of, let's say, under express entry, it can be work out easily enough that okay, we want fewer, we're going to raise the points, right? And we can manage that. When it comes things to do, like say, okay, we've got this program, be it for self-employed or I agree entirely with with what Pantea said, and as I think you and Catherine had said, it's more systemic across that. It's not right to say we're going to judge it harder now because we need fewer of them.
Randy, let's zoom in
Yeah.
on that. Let's zoom in on that because this systemic problem, and I love that Catherine brought it up, and it keeps on coming up. Like we cannot forget about the bigger system problem. Talk about this tiny program within the whole immigration system. This system of ambiguity, the system of no transparency, no accountability, and this system of increasingly showing blatantly the distrust that it has for the people that own the system. And that's in the people. Let's just start with ourselves. Immigration lawyers gathered together under civil society banners such as CELA and CBA. I don't want to get into the discussion which one is more effective or not. Categorically speaking, they have been excluded from the system. You have the most sophisticated users of this system, and you very, very unapologetically try to exclude them. Look at what they did with the monetary problems. They literally lied about consulting the Federation of Law Societies. And I want to go back to Catherine. Like, you chaired the CBA. Randy, you chaired the OBA. And me and Pantea have been on the executive. We're seeing it. Like, today is a different game. I think it's a worse game. But Catherine, why do you think there is such mistrust between government and the people who own it?
Because we're perceived as being self-interested and we're promoting that which is going to line our pockets. It's that simple. And it's always going to be that way. I learned that very early on in the game, Siavash. I think it was 1990 or 1991. I had worked on a political campaign, and the candidate that I worked for became the parliamentary secretary for immigration. And he said, "We're never going to listen to you. We'll listen to you if it suits our purpose, but we're never going to listen to you as a bloc." And that was part of the discussion about consultants. So there's an inherent distrust of us to the extent that we can lobby as organizations, whether CBA or CELA, and we can make a point that resonates with them. That's what we can do. If the focus of these Catalyst Canada sessions should be to say, what are the nuggets? What are the gems that we can go back to government with? And let's be serious. I'm sorry, Pantea, I don't want to take this away. I'm a blatant conservative, so I love hearing somebody say they like Stephen Harper and they don't like a liberal government. That just makes my day right there. But I don't think any political party is running the show. These are run by the government bureaucrats that are lifelong government employees, and we can't get rid of them. So we have to think of things at a policy level. How can we sell this so that they meet their targets, they meet their goals, they don't have to spend too much money on litigation, they can get the kind of applicants that they want? We spend so much of our time each and every day. I had somebody in my office yesterday who had to say, "You're never going to qualify. You're just never going to qualify. Not in this lifetime, unless something dramatic happens."
Catherine, that's something very interesting. Let's, two things. One of the things is that you're saying, okay, it's not the leadership, it's the bureaucrat.
Mhm.
And I want to refer you to the Yates report, something that came out recently, right? The Yates report, and I don't want to be quoting it exactly, but they use the expression IRCC is broken as an organization and it's being held together. I think that was a nice way of saying, hey, this is a broken system. It's just people doing their best. I want to counter argue. I want to say I don't think it's the people's problem at the bureaucrat level. They just listen to whoever is on top, and whoever's on top is just confused. One day is Ukraine, one day is Iran. We want to show the world that we're everything at the everything everywhere all at the same time, and that's just not possible. So let's spend some time here because it's very important for our advocacy stage. Right? If under the advocacy, we have to make sure that the solutions that we gather from the insights in Catalyst Canada, we want to put it before decision makers, and the decision makers who are the public servants. So,
yeah,
Randy, what do you think? Do you think this is the work of a bureaucrat and the leaders are just, oh, whatever you say I do, or is the other way around? Is it leadership confusion that is causing all of the problems at the bureaucracy level?
I'll lapse into the lawyerly. Well, it can be both or something, but I think there's probably more driving it. The difficulties with at the bureaucrat level. There's lots of moving parts going on. Like all of us, here we work in the area, we engage in the area, we try to figure out what's going on every day or something. There's no shortage of people who will confront in our personal lives or social lives who have opinions about immigrants and they're letting too many into the country, this, that, and the other. Oh, by the way, here's Joe here, he's illegal, can you get him here to stay or something? We need more people like that in Canada or something. This came to me in sort of stark relief, I guess, recently, a week or two ago. I'm part of a dinner club that meets occasionally, and there was one of the members. I won't give specifics, but to safeguard privacy, but he is very a background very, very, very high level in immigration. Okay, and I'll leave it at that or something. And said something high level, that we need more immigrants to Canada because of the discussion was about the changing demographics and in Canadian life and the declining birth rate and so on and so forth. We need people to contribute economically, pay into the system and so forth, right? We've got 500,000 or something. We got to continue to grow that, so on and so forth. And someone else their hair went on fire and they say, no, that can't be or something because look at all these, these Indian students who are coming and working at Tim Hortons or something and they're taken advantage of and something's not wrong. Or okay. We know, I think, that there's both the macro, there's the micro. It's difficult sometimes to fit it together or something. So I don't, but I do think that a lot of the time we look at the number of I've lost count of how many immigration ministers there's been throughout my time and so a lot of it is driven by the at the bureaucratic level. And I think, as Catherine succinctly put it, getting back to the issue of representation or the role of us in the system, there's a skepticism. Yeah, they think that we're self-interested, we're lining our pockets. I think the most benign, if I was forced to sort of come up with a benign characterization of why IRCC would be taking the view they do, or some of them do, they might say, look, we want to make this user-friendly, right? We'll just put everything on the web. You don't have to pay a lawyer to sort of sift through it and understand it. And we're trying to be user-friendly. Now, sorry.
So God bless them for that.
Yeah, but I don't think it's so easy. There's also those who, maybe this is too particular, but thinking, okay, when I'm finished at IRCC, I'd like to go out on my own or something and be a consultant or something. So you shouldn't have to be a lawyer to do this, and so on and so forth.
So Randy, okay, let's unpack this. The self-interest we can really talk about, because our self-interest, I think, is very, very well aligned with IRCC's interest. Our interest is to make sure that this system is orderly, that this system is just, that this system is functioning efficiently. That's our interest.
But that's not necessarily IRCC's interest. Why would you?
Sure, and that's why we're having this conversation recorded. We're going to publicize it, and we're going to make sure IRCC understands, because at the end of the day, IRCC is a $5.2 billion budget department that I, as the Canadian taxpayer, is paying for. So we demand accountability. I'm not just going to accept, hey, you're lawyers, you have self-interest, and that self-interest is just the only reason that I see for excluding you.
I
That
actually
doesn't make
don't
sense
think that's
because,
the only one. Exactly. When you see the
okay,
AMPs come through and they suddenly add lawyers when that was never intentional. So for the viewers, we're talking about administrative monetary penalties that are being introduced as an additional power by IRCC against representatives. When you suddenly see the lawyers thrown into that, I think it's actually intentional to be able to keep us in line. If you think about it, lawyers are the only group that are holding them accountable in law. So forget public discourse, you put a tweet under their tweet, oh, this is ridiculous. Well, that really obviously does nothing. But we're the ones taking them to court for actual accountability, and that may not be very flavorful for them. And maybe they're looking for ways to silence the more passionate and advocacy focused of us. They're giving
they
themselves
are
that
doing
power
that.
suddenly over us,
Well,
right?
Panta, let's go to the holding them actually accountable in the court. They're actually doing that. 85% of federal court's business is immigration, and immigration is just flooding the federal court. Federal court is swamped and is saying, hey, and they're not paying them. There's no budget, right? I mean, like Canada rule of law is like, oh, I'm not paying the federal court because of the immigration files. So they are essentially doing this. I think this is war at the open, but I want to argue that it's not just lawyers. I mean, show me one civil society organization, show me some non-governmental association that is being constructively consulted when immigration policy is being made. I don't think it's just they have something against lawyers. They have something against the population being involved in making immigration policy, which is our lifeline. Like, this is immigration. This is something that we have to remember. For Canada, this is not a privilege. Like, back to Randy's point, it's if we close down our doors, we will die as a nation, right? And this is like, oh, if it's the bureaucrats, I want to go back to that point. If it's the bureaucrats making the decision, $5.2 billion, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources. What happened? How did we miscalculate Canada's absorptive capacity by 30%? One day we're saying 500,000 is amazing, and then the next day we're saying, oh, we have to slash it. I see it. If it's a bureaucrat, and I still believe, with all the criticism that I have a strong belief in the good faith of the overwhelming majority of the IRCC body that is working there, right? So I don't think that people with their good faith sat down, started looking at the demography reporting and forecasting and said, hey, 500,000 is the right number, and then 300,000 is the right number. So it's the leadership that is coming down. I want to spend some little more time on the root cause of where are these decisions coming from, and why are we excluded in the process of making this decision? And most importantly, what we can do about it. Katrin, what can we do about this? Whatever the reason, we are excluded. But what can be done?
The only thing that we can do, in my opinion, and I've been doing this for 35 years, is do what we are doing. We lobby, we make submissions, we present them, whether it's through the CBA or through CELA or through LACAD or through whatever organization. And IRCC does pay attention to what we say. They may disregard it, but they do pay attention. It gets registered. But our goals and our experiences are not necessarily the same. We represent individuals, and we see the frustration, the exasperation, the suffering that these individuals experience, who are interpreting to their best and often and are on the basis of our advice to fit through the criteria of the program. And then when the programs get overutilized, IRCC and the federal court has to clamp down. That's just, it's what's been going on for all the time that I've been practicing. And I haven't come up with a different solution. I have seen usually when a new minister of immigration is appointed, processing freezes for 6 months until the minister learns the portfolio. It's a very frustrating time, in my experience. And then there are different ministers with different strengths. And sometimes ministers impose certain things and they are accepted by departments, and other times they aren't. I've seen the department bring down immigration ministers very hurtfully, very nastily. So I don't have the solution other than we just continue to lobby. We accept what our role is. We take our passion and our frustration on the chin and we focus nuggets of information that they can take back to their decision makers, whether they're bureaucratic decision makers or political decision makers, and leave it with them. I often lobby from two different perspectives. I often lobby politically and then also internally through our organization.
But Catherine,
got an
how much of this?
additional method. I've got a
Go ahead.
glowing new attempt at accountability. So what my mantra has been since Tafreshi, because that case really proved to me the power in numbers, is that group litigation is a must, first of all, because at the end of the day, what we're discovering through all of these ATIPs and now these more wanton kind of categorical decisions is that these are management level decisions. Make no mistake about it. When it comes down to a slew of refusals, it is not by some fluke that some officer just started doing that. Those are management level decisions. So in terms of accountability, what my new strategy is strategic litigation. And that strategic litigation, what the self-employed litigations has now snowballed into, because I think the self-employed group has become the litmus test of what is wrong with immigration law and processing and the legal system overall. So Siavash, you talk about us as a lawyer, forget the clients losing faith in our legal system, in our immigration system, whatnot. Now we're at the level where lawyers are openly on their social media platforms talking about lacking trust in the immigration system, disbelieving the integrity of the minister when he's making these decisions. So what the litigations have devolved into is to frame each of these issues as an incremental process rising to an abuse of power, but then going to the root source of why it's allowed to continue so flagrantly when the court is giving the same order over and over and over and it's not being listened to. When the court in Tafreshi gives a $50,000 cost award and it's not being listened
So Pantea, you're kind of answering yourself. That goes to the effectiveness of the litigation that you're proposing.
So hold on. That's exactly why. When I saw that even with a judgment of 50 grand, it did not impact the slightest bit the minister's conduct on these programs, and especially, again, the Tafreshi applicants. Now I've understood the source of the problem. It's kind of really crystallized for me. And the source of the problem really is the design of the accountability mechanisms in IRPA, which is minimal, barely nothing. So now these have culminated in a constitutional challenge against sections of IRPA that disable appeal rights. So the section 72.2 that disallows the appeal of interlocutory orders by design, the need for certification, all of those working together causes an absolute bottleneck at the court level. And because it's only at the court level and doesn't really get much traction, it doesn't get much impact in result of change of actions by the minister. So this is now a constitutional challenge to say applicants have the bare minimum rights of being treated with the dignity that they have and not just file numbers. So, and that requires minimum guarantees in the application process, such as knowing the case to be met up front, not allowing that to be played with during the application process so that you're suddenly surprised with all these new grounds to refuse you, which if you knew about it, you wouldn't have invested in the program in the first place.
Randy, I want to summarize something for you. Catherine is essentially suggesting, let's keep on doing the same thing that we have been doing, write the submissions, they're paying attention. With all due respect, I don't think that has been working and it's not working now. Pantea is suggesting a strategic litigation. Well, we're all lawyers. We love litigation. It's a good, fight in the court, but the wheels of justice are too slow. Nobody really cares about litigation. I mean, in the bigger scheme of things, and we're seeing that, the decision after decision after decision after decision, the inconsistency, it's just sometimes, it makes us go mad. Like, oh, look at this decision cannot be more clear. And yet you're doing the same exact thing. So Randy, what do you think? Do you have another proposal how we can get out of this deadlock or combination of what Pantea and Catherine are saying?
Well, I would I guess add something to what Catherine and Pantea are saying. I agree with Catherine. I think the dialogue has to go on, should go on, however frustrating it may be at times. And I think the professional organizations, CBA and CELA that you've referenced, without going off on a whole nother tangent, I think there's ongoing important efforts that will uh, continue to play out in terms of the role of counsel and so forth. In terms of the litigation, yeah, it does something that's potentially maybe not as much as one would like, and I'm intrigued by Pantea's reference to further litigation to continue to try to improve the system. An additional thought I had, and I don't know what the three of you think about this, because this comes back to issues of transparency and accountability. Accountability, so that who's making these decisions and why and where are they, and the transparency, wanting to know, what the case is you have to meet and what it's all about. I think I think you would agree throughout the years, immigration has become more and more policy driven, or in terms of fine, there's the act, there's the regulations. It used to be that there was a lot more of act than there was regulations, and then it sort of shifted a lot more regulations than act. Say, well, okay, well, maybe that's okay. The world changes quickly. You have to be able to supple. And okay, and then there's always been policies, and then ministerial instructions for how many years, and the legality of that was challenged, and it was upheld, so forth. But as we know, there's continuously, the ministerial instructions sometimes come through with not much notice, if any notice at all, or something. The policies, you get to work on a Monday, and something all of a sudden IRCC announces, okay, as of 2 minutes from now, we're stopping this, we're changing that, we're changing it. And I can't help but think, I understand there may be some instances where IRCC is for practical reasons, needs to respond very quickly and deftly and nimbly, be it a geopolitical emergency, or if they give a heads up to people, that's just going to undermine, the whole process at all. But otherwise, for the vast majority of things, why there couldn't be, be it with, the instructions or policies, to be more transparent and to put it out there in advance, and to allow for, now they might ignore it or not, but at least, if people's hairs are going on fire, or they're getting a lot of pushback, or maybe they'll think through rethink through a thing or two. But now, I was, talking to, one of my colleagues the other day about a particular matter. I'm looking. I said, "Well, look at the act says such and such." He says, "Forget about the act. Just go online. Look at what the policy is, because they're not paying attention to the actors." And say, "Okay, that's the way it is." But there should be some more formality, so that Pantea's clients understand that, or if we're changing something and we're going to ask for this or that, so understand it. But this just kind of
so you're proposing, so the change that you're proposing would come from the legislature. We would need to change the law. Here's a disruptive idea.
From the legislature, or the legislature saying, when policies are introduced, unless there's comes within some specific exceptions, right? There should be opportunity for feedback and so-called stakeholder responses.
Well, there is. Like, if you look at it, the consultation is there, but like we live in 2025.
Not always. Not with a lot of the policies.
I agree. So, yeah. I agree.
Declared consultation and not actual consultation.
Of course, and we are seeing it. We are seeing it in broad daylight. They're saying and they are lying about it. This is just, I don't know how, I don't have an adjective to put for that, to describe that. But here's the thing, to say the least, consultation has always been there, but we live 2025, and this is Canada, right? The world has tried participatory democracy. The world has working models where civil society gets a permanent seat at the table. Immigration is our lifeline, right? If it was anything else, I wouldn't have a problem. Oh, let partisans make decisions about it. But since it's immigration, isn't one way carving a permanent consultative status for all civil society to be there? A minister cannot make an immigration decision without consulting that body first. We need to be at the table.
The consulting you're talking about, like what it's, I mean,
Bring everybody on board. Bring lawyers on board. Bring businesses.
I'm alluding to a more formal process, that it's not just, yeah, I spoke with this group and then lie about what they in fact told you or something. To
Exactly.
have a more formal, not unlike the consulting that's required for regulations.
No, something
You know,
permanent. I'm
yeah,
arguing for something permanent
yeah,
in the system
Something
design.
permanent
Like,
that you would get politically or through the courts, because the court wouldn't mandate that. The court would say the government needs to be nimble and be able to prioritize as it deems fit, and so maybe consulting will drag them their feet, and they don't have time for that.
No, I think this probably has to
doing
be
that.
through the decision of the government, maybe even if it's a matter of amending legislation or regulation as opposed to the courts. Yeah.
But I am trying to get minimum requirements of notice and things like that through these litigations. In terms of the relief that are being requested, they're at the individual level, they're at the systemic level, and they include things like the need for a minimum notice in terms of changes to policy and processing before, at least forget the rug being pulled out from under you when it's announced and it's applied 2 seconds later. Notice, but where it's happening even without notice, that's just incomprehensible in what we call ourselves to be a leading democracy of the world. That to have such little respect for the rule of law and procedural fairness is really incomprehensible. But at least hopefully some minimums, hopefully will come through these litigations.
At least at a meaningful consultation. Let's go back to the FSE. Do you think the Actors Guild of Canada was consultant of program design? Do you think the Movie Makers Association was consultant? Do we know? One question that we have to answer. Go back to FSE design. Do we need more cultural activists in Canada? Do we need more athletes? Did we consult with the Olympics Association? Do we need more gold winners? Do we need more any type of the experiences that we're zooming the FSC program on? Did we consult their respective associations? So we're not just talking lawyers. We're talking every kind of civil society, non-governmental, even businesses. Self-interest is part of everything, Catherine. Like we have to accept every person on this planet in 2025, and let's not forget what's happening in the global scheme of things, when the most powerful nations in the world are so unapologetically making everything about self-interest and money. So we live in that world. So we have to accept everybody's self-interested. The art is bringing all these interests together and make a compromise. And that's one thing that the government has consistently failed to do on their immigration policy.
I don't have the answer to your question as to whether or not the industries were consulted, but in my gut feeling tells me they weren't, because the legislation that we are dealing with for self-employed applications was introduced in 2002. And there's really been no change to that other than what has come through the court or freezing the program through ministerial instructions. There hasn't been. I would anticipate that now that the program has been frozen in April of 2024 for 2.5 years, that there will be some consultation. Whether they reach out to the industry sectors or not, I don't know. And they may do it for the sake of window dressing. They love to make an offer on a Friday afternoon before a Christmas holiday with a deadline just after New Year's to say, give us your thoughts, which isn't realistic. But it answers puts a check mark in the box saying this is what we've done. But as lawyers, what do? We advocate and we litigate. And so we are going to continue to advocate, which is going to take me back to Randy's concept, and I'll come back to that. And when we don't get what we think should happen, I'm not going to say what we want, but what we think should happen to improve the program, then we have to litigate to defend our clients' interests and the integrity of the system. Okay, we're not just litigating, again, to line our pockets. We're talking about how do we keep the system honest? And it's been shown time and time again that the system isn't always honest. That's why we have GCMS notes that are locked so that immigration officers can't change what they've said after the fact. That's just the reality. When I started out with the CBA in 1990, and I was a national chair by 1995 or 96, I don't remember, I was constantly called upon to comment on various things, and I criticized the government vehemently, and I've criticized every different government that's been in, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. But one day I sat down and I asked myself, if I were king, what would I do? What would be my immigration program? And Randy, he made that comment earlier on in the presentation. I have not figured out the perfect system. I haven't.
Well, that was the perfect segue. That was the perfect segue. I was actually looking for that. Let's talk about the future state of the federal self-employed program. Okay, let's talk about future state.
On that.
It's in April LexSpace. Richard has got the data. It's in April LexSpace. It says right now, program design. There are significant concerns with how the program is designed and whether it is yielding the quality of applicants we would expect. In addition, the uncapped nature of the program hinders our ability to provide good client service. Recommended action, program redesign with capped intake and a strategy to eliminate the inventory.
Okay, so
That was
that's
already on their plate in 2015, Catherine. In 2015, when they did the survey, that's exactly what the output was. The program needs a redesign because applicants don't know who we were looking for in the first place, which is why these low-scale farmers are applying, and they don't know what we want from them in terms of the application materials. That's been there. They're just not acting on it.
Let's talk about that.
In 2015. And this is the data that has been released in a report by IRCC in May of 2023. Holy moly, we've got 8 years and they haven't wrapped their heads around this, and they still haven't. So now
instead they're just pushing litigation.
Catherine, that's why we are having this conversation. Our Friday noon, right? We're volunteering our time having this conversation because they're sleeping behind the wheel. So let's talk about the future state. If we take back control over the design of a program that works, over the design of a program that helps Canada get what it wants and what it needs, how would that federal self-employed program look like to you in its future ideal state? First question, do we still have a narrow focus on artists and athletes? Or no, we're just going to open it up. If we're opening it up, do we say just bring your job and your job is okay? Or no, we're going to turn it and transform it into an entrepreneurial looking kind of a program? Let's start with Randy. What do you think? If you could design a program
Randy said he doesn't have those thoughts in mind as to how he'd improve the program.
Do you? Or if you're not, we can go to Pantea.
I do. Let me start.
Okay.
Okay, let's go. Let's go with
small ones. I've been inspired by the conversation this afternoon. I think there's substance and there's procedural, and they're both very important, obviously. So in terms of the procedural, I think Pantea in particular, but the rest, the rest of us haven't argued with it. There's serious problems with just the processing, irrespective of what the end goal is. There's I began by saying I would still stand by it, and I think there has to be and there needs to be discretion built into the system, but not at the expense of bureaucratic arbitrariness informed by the wrong criteria. Trying to lay that out. Do you need this? Do you need that? The procedural safeguards and whatnot. So I think that would go a long way to allaying some of the procedural concerns. In terms of the substantive, that one I'm landing on a more I don't know. I can understand why a lot of people say what's so special about athletes or artists. And by the way, aren't we all athletes or artists in one fashion or another? But if it morphs into the entrepreneur or program, but something a bit different, then all the problems that can arise with that, then I'm not sure. But you go ahead with all your ideas, Pantea.
Not all, but I mean, certainly the microscopic inspection of this program for the last 7 to 8 years really does give you some ideas, not ideas based on fairness and the applicant side, but ideas based on what it is that seems to be the beef that IRCC has, that it's trying to resolve, that it's doing very nefariously, which I would like them to do openly. And the openly, yes, would be a clear criteria up front so that we know what we're dealing with. People can make an informed decision whether to apply or not. I do think the program is necessary for people to be law-abiding we as lawyers understand the difference between work experience that's employed versus self-employed, right? So for express entry, you're not supposed to get points, for example, for self-employed work and things like that. In these industries specifically, the reason this program exists is because these people would not be able to qualify under the federal skilled worker program and the like, because they don't have year-long contracts to say, I've been doing this, I've been doing this. They're contract based on services being offered. I'm going to give you, 6 workout sessions a week, and I'm going to give your child 10 swim lessons for the summer. That's what the program attracts in terms of people. And those people, because the structure of their work experience wouldn't allow them to qualify under the other programs, yes, I think for sure this program is very valuable and it should be maintained, but in a more clear fashion. In terms of how to improve the requirements, because it's clear that as a general rule, the government has moved towards language requirements. Now, for sure, it's extremely clear that people working within their cultural subsets don't necessarily need to have that language requirement. For example, last night I was watching this news show of this man speaking in a different language. The news show is a different language, and he's very proficient, fluent, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't even expect, but if that person was in Canada, because one part of the segment went into him interviewing an English speaking person, and he was fumbling and whatnot. So if that person came in as a journalist to Canada and they were covering just that community's news, that person doesn't at all need English as demonstrated. But, let's say you're going to put that requirement. What definitely needs to happen is that the point system needs to be rejigged. It's clear that what is coming through is too low level for what the government wants. You can satisfy the points requirements just by having minimum of your 6
forget what government
experience.
wants. What do you want? What do you want? Because you're saying government wants. Forget government. We're on ideal state right now.
Okay,
First of
ideal
all,
state
did
would
you
not
did
have
you did you
language.
say so? Would you put the program focus? Would you still keep the program focused on NOC 5? On athletes and self-employed, or no, you open it up for any self-employed person?
No, I would keep it limited to that, because those are by design professions that would not be employable per se and per what our vision of employment is. If you say I'm, for example, like your client, Catherine, who's an accountant, but they're a full-time accountant to just these people or whatnot, an accountant still could be full-time employed by, let's say, a production company or this or that. I can see a bit more them being able to get employment in terms of the other programs versus someone who is that athlete, that artist, that singer, that book writer, and whatever. So I think,
would you make language tougher or easier?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Go ahead.
Absolutely not. What I have litigated many times is the imposition of a language requirement in modern day that has proven for it not to be needed. So if someone's coming to work within their own community and they can show they have ready going clients in their own community, they're going to earn a living. They're going to be a catalyst to economic growth in that industry. They don't need language proficiency. Everyone that's operating within Canada right now can even get medical services in their language of choice for the most part. You have your own doctors and whatnot, and you have all kinds of apps that immediately can translate what you're saying to EMS to whatnot. So the technological and practical realities of 2025 have demonstrated language skills are not required for your job. They might.
Pantea, do you mind if I jump in? Let me just put on my Stephen Harper hat for a moment or something. So in terms of the language, even accepting everything you said, the people can manage and so on and so forth. Is that what we want? I mean, a kind of balkanization, if you will, of all, community of communities, as a short-lived former prime minister once put it, or something. Or do we want? No, we have two official languages in Canada, and it's not too much to expect, not just for economic purposes, but for cultural purposes, that people who come here will make exceptions for those under the family class, but for people who come under the economic class, that there's some things they buy into and some things they're able to connect with Canada.
Randy,
So,
But that's a
yeah,
cultural
even
consideration, though. That's not
it
economic.
is, but
That's
Panta,
something that we.
that's a good consideration because let's remember we're keeping this program culturally focused, and culture and its barest form is about language. So if we're really trying to bring people to induce cultural fusion, let's put it that way, right? Like I was always confused about multiculturalism. What is it that we want? What is it that we're trying to achieve? But to me, at least, the thing that bring us all at least closer is the language. So language has a lot to do with, okay, how am I building this culture? And let's not forget the struggles of identity that Canada has from since day one, right? So if we remove this language, again, Randy's point, right? What is the bigger vision for Canada? Is it a community of communities? Is it like, oh, you're Indian, you go to Brampton, you're Iranian, you go to Markham, you're Korean, you go there and you don't have to interact. You just have to be politically detached. And this political detachment will make people win seats with less than 50% of the vote. So we're sitting here fixing their mess. Catherine, what are your thoughts on that? Is the ideal Canada one where we say, hey, you don't need to know the language. Just come here, go to your own respective communities
Sorry,
and be
hold on.
who you
I
are?
want to preface that
Yeah.
that's not what I
Okay.
said.
Sure.
But
Yes. Go
I
ahead.
didn't get to finish my thought. But yes, that's
Go
an
ahead,
element of
Panta,
it.
and then we go to
No,
Catherine. You
you can
finish
go
your
for things.
no. Do you have anything to add? Like, was
Sure.
that a fair summarization of your point? Because you're saying language is okay. No, tell me, is language important, not important, or how important?
So it depends. It depends on the program and your intention. Again, it comes back to your thought of culture. So what I was distinguishing is the language requirement to do the work that you're saying will qualify me for permanent residence, and that's going to cause the economic contribution versus the immersion in Canadian culture that we want from new immigrants overall in terms of their language ability. They're two different things. And what I'm suggesting is that in this program specifically, not necessarily do you need English for all of them. For example, if you're going to be an athlete coming here to work on the national team, sure, you need English because you're going to be on the national team and you're going to have other teammates and whatnot. But imagine, for example, a singer who's 60 years old, who's now coming to give shows and things like that here. That person, first of all, certainly doesn't need language, but the benefit that they bring Canadians, the true reality of new immigrants is that we experience, I'm a first generation immigrant, so, my biases are right on my sleeves, right? We experience not only a culture shock, but a sense of loss of community and culture from what we leave behind and what we enter into here. Right? And that, for example, is concerts from the people that you've been listening to for 30, 40 years and, having your local bread and things like that. Right? So when that person coming in is coming in to give peace of mind and a sense of connection and community to the Canadians that are existing and to prevent them from returning to back home, wherever that might be, because they're missing that, I don't think that person needs to have a language requirement per se. Again, it could be flexible as part of the program is right now. You can get points for it or not, but for it to be a mandatory requirement, I disagree with it. But I do think they should raise the points for sure. And one thing that's developed, for example, from the Ankara visa post and some of the subsequent case law, I do think it's not a bad idea to show that you have ready, able, paying clients. That I don't think is not, that I think is a reasonable.
That's something
part
else.
of the
That
program.
traction.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's for the part that if you want to be economically established in Canada, at least show me some traction.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
Catherine, what are your thoughts on this language? Because language is one of those things that goes to the core of the immigration system, right? Because what Pantea is saying is I completely agree. So maybe one of the solution is, why do you have a language at PR? Just remove language there, give people the chance to come here, but have an expectation on them to learn this language and just take it to the citizenship level. That could be one solution.
I can tell you right now, if you don't put language in at the PR level, you're never going to make it at the citizenship level. People have to have, they don't acquire that afterwards. So I think my opinion on this is that there needs to be some harmonization or synthesization between what Pantea is saying and what Randy is saying. Yes, it is possible to do your job in Canada. That's what all the investors from China used to say. I don't need to be able to speak English. I can hire an interpreter and I can do my business. That didn't fly very well. And IRCC didn't like that very well because those people didn't integrate into the mainstream community in being able to communicate in either English or French. So we do have to take the reality that we have two official languages, and the people that are coming here need to be able to demonstrate that they can function on a basic level. Whether they do their jobs or not isn't necessarily the issue. But I want to go to your bigger point, Siavash, is what do we see as the future of the program? And in all fairness, that's not something we can answer in an hour and a half. We've raised a lot of very, very important points in this dialogue. And if we want to really make a difference on the program, I think we have to sit back and sharpen our pencils and evaluate the business program at large over the last 30 or 40 years and say, what do we want? Do we want an investor program? Do we want an entrepreneur program? Do we want a business experience class? Do we want to have SUVs or self-employed? Like, I think if we want to contribute, then we have to go back to what Randy said right at the opening. I haven't figured out an alternative to the program. And that's where I think we as lawyers can contribute. One other point I'd like to add, and I know that this is a big stepping stone to a whole nother discussion. We are just 2,000 immigration lawyers in Canada, and there are over 12,000 immigration consultants in Canada. And I will say with certainty that part of the reason that we are now facing this avalanche of cases that IRCC is refusing is because people are selling a program that they shouldn't be selling it to people. And that is another aspect of the business immigration program that we need to bring this reality to IRCC. You're right, Siavash, we have a contribution to make, and we take the immigration program very close to heart because this is what we do every day and we see how it affects people. And we have to distinguish ourselves. So we just have to hold our heads high and say, okay, this is what we think we can contribute. We've taken the time to analyze this. This is how we think that you should be able to deal with the program. But I can tell you, we're going to come, as it pertains to the self-employed category, and it's probably going to come to absolutely every category, we're facing caps. They're going to put limits as to how many they're going to accept every day because or every year or every month or whatever, because that's the only way that they can manage their inventory. And from a bureaucrat, that's what immigration processing is all about. If we have this amount of inventory and we have this amount of resources, which means human capital, how do we process these amount of people? It's a numbers game.
I agree with caps. I agree even that caps are necessary because the alternative is to play games with inventory to get rid of it for other reasons. So I'm all for caps 100%. And actually, people have made jokes about the fact that the program pause was caused because of these litigations, but I'm happy to hear that because the litigations are all about why are you continuing to take inventory if you are not intending to approve them. What we're arguing in the cases is bad faith rising to an abuse of power. Like, that's significant. Imagine how much evidence I have gathered to be able to so strongly be saying that's the argument I'm taking forward. At the time we did Tafreshi, we still did not have a lot of this ATIP evidence. We still didn't have subsequent rounds of this kind of abusive behavior by the minister. And so at that time, we were very timid and with trepidation even posing the specter of bad faith. Now I'm 100% saying this is bad faith. You do not intend to approve these applications. So why are you continuing to take them in? And with the litigants rising, the number of litigants rising, and the issues raised, because now there are so many subsequent groups, because despite the Tafreshi judgment saying you shouldn't surprise applicants with a change of process and a standard to meet without notice, that's exactly what they've done 2-3 further rounds since Tafreshi. So now the issue has escalated and elevated from there.
Well, without a doubt, problems are many and they're everywhere. Randy, what are your final thoughts? Because we're right on time. You're on mute. I'm going to unmute you. I'll unmute you.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead. I unmuted
Yeah,
you.
sorry. Okay, yeah. Stay tuned. I think I would agree with the caps if they're implemented in a sensible way, meaning don't do it that everyone's got to line up and try to get it in on December 31st or 12/01 January 1st, or don't do it that you let it build up like with the parental sponsorships and then say, okay, we're not going to take it for the next year because we still got inventory from the last year or something. Just do it, in a proper way where there might be, even if there's an element of, of a lottery to it. And otherwise, I think it's incumbent on everyone, myself included, obviously, to continue to think through, okay, what do we want to do and what are the practical ways of moving forward, given the substantive and procedural issues we've identified.
Thank you very much indeed, because that is exactly what we're doing. I want to thank you very, very sincerely for your contribution. This is your volunteer time putting in for solving very, very big problems that is not just affecting our clients, but is affecting the country at large. So on behalf of our committee and on behalf of the bigger Sila family, I thank you very, very much for the time that you gave us and for the attention that you gave Catalyst Canada. This is just the beginning. We're doing as many conversations as we can. We're going outside of just lawyers. We're talking and engaging economists, professors, academics, civil society, anyone else. To us, this is an inclusive movement for better immigration policy in Canada. And once again, thank you all for participating and being part of this initiative.